This is a very special event tonight. We are experimenting with new technologies of translation. We have translation devices available outside. We are trying to make our lectures accessible to Moroccan audiences, especially those who prefer to listen to what we have to say in French or Arabic. So our translation, we have two sets of translators in the back who will be translating this lecture in Arabic or French. So if you are not so sure, you're going to understand what the lecturer or what the professor will be saying, please make sure you use one of those devices and they may help you get a better sense of what the conversation is about. I do want to thank our students first and foremost. They are tremendously brave. They are a wonderful group of students. They are exploring Morocco like as if they were the descendants of Ibn Battuta, the famous Moroccan traveler. They go to Marrakesh, they go to other places, and now they are very interested in what is being said and what be the kinds of conversations we are having in this auditorium. They're real pioneers. You have to understand that it's not easy for American students to choose to spend a semester in Morocco. We are trying very hard to change the misperceptions people have about Morocco, because Morocco is very different from other places, from other countries. It's very safe, but it's an ongoing challenge for us at the University of New England to encourage students, to bring more students to our campus, our beautiful campus. And the students have told me that this is the most beautiful part of the University of New England, whether they're in Maine or in Morocco. So thank you so much for being brave and coming to Tangier and benefiting from this experience. I'd like also to thank the staff in Tangier. Murad Ben Kiran, everybody knows Murad Ben Kiran. He works 24/7, and as I always tell him, there are 5 different Murads. If I want to speak to Murad 1, I say about something, and then there's a Murad 2 who handles a different kind of issue. So he is tremendously useful, and I cannot thank him enough for the work he's been doing at the University of New England. I'd like to thank Dua. She is Ben Imran. She works with our students. She takes care of their cultural life, their residential life. She travels with them. She just came back from Marrakesh. They go to Spain. And she is incredibly resourceful and helpful to our students. Her English is flawless, and people at the University of New England in Maine, they just love what she does with our students. So thank you, Dua. I think there she is in the back. I would also like to thank Hassan El-Ghurfti. He's in Casablanca, maybe making a video clip of some famous Moroccan star. But he is our kind of official videographer here in Tangier. He travels with our students. He records their experiences in video and film. And he produces occasionally some very fascinating videos, and that our students love very much. So he's part of the family. And this gentleman here with the camera, Rashid Wattasi, is also a very accomplished photographer. His works have been exhibited in France, in Chile, and other places. He is truly a professional photographer. So to have him here with us is a great honor and a great privilege. Thank you, Rashid, for taking the pictures. And now I want to thank our staff in Maine. As I'm speaking right now, my colleagues in Maine are watching. So I want to say thank you to all of you. I'm going to begin with Liz Bennett, my assistant director at the Center for Global Humanities, who has arranged a travel for our speaker today, Tony David. She has been working with me for 9 years, at least since 2009, I'm sorry. And she takes care of all the travel arrangement of the speakers, all the logistics of the Center for Global Humanities, which we established in 2009 in Maine. And now she is taking care of all the logistics, at least the travel parts, of the speakers who are coming to speak in Tangier. She's a wonderful resource and a very hard-working person, and I really cannot do a lot of what I do without Liz. So thank you, Liz, in Maine. And also Josh Pahigian. Josh Pahigan is an accomplished writer. He works with us in the Office of Communications and also in the Department of English and the Center for Global Humanities. And he's the one who writes press releases, makes sure everything related to both the Center for Global Humanities in Maine and the Tangier Forum for Global Studies is accurate. And he is a tremendous resource to all of us. Watching us also are my colleagues and staff members in the Office of Communications. Hi, Crystal. I know you're watching. I just saw the text message you sent me. And Crystal is our Director of Communications. She is incredibly passionate about global affairs and communications. She is also tremendously helpful in the short time she has been with us in Maine. And I really want to thank you, Crystal, for the work you've been doing. Sitting also in that office, my graphic designers, Laura Duffy, Maureen Miller, and Shelley, and they are all, everything you see that's designed on this campus, the posters, the postcards, the things, everything you see is designed by them, and they do a tremendous work. Thank you so much. Our web people are also there. Ellen Canner and John Kyle, our new recruit. John Kyle is passionate about global education, so he's taking care of everything you see on the website. And film, Dan Lambert, he is our great film producer. He does all the great videos also that you see for the University of New England. And of course, here with us tonight, right from Maine, for the first time in Morocco, is Dave Diego, right in the back. He is helping us with all the video stuff and AV equipment and connecting with his Moroccan colleagues in making sure that this operation works well. And talking about people in the back, we have people from engineers from Tangier. I'm going to mention his name, is Mohammed Hunaini, who's just joined our team. He is very talented. He's the one who's orchestrating the lights, the audio systems, and this lecture is going to be live streamed. People are watching us right now in a variety of countries around the globe, and because of the work these guys have been doing in the back. So thank you, Mohammed Hunaini. And he is supported by his friend Muad. They both have been coming to this campus for a long time to make sure everything works properly. And I want to also thank Mahmoud Chazi, who came from Rabat, to make sure the connections, the network is working flawlessly to make sure that this event is transmitted. I'm saying this to give you a sense. So in the back, we have people from the United States, people from Rabat, and people from Tangier. And then we have a group of technicians and translators making sure all the translation systems are working. For one single event that I'm mentioning right now, it takes the effort of all of these people to make sure it works well. So it just gives you a sense that what it takes for a lecture that we are going to be listening or witnessing tonight to take place. I want to thank our friends and supporters. There are many in the audience. I cannot mention all by name. Some people are watching us live. One of them is a friend of mine, Philippe Laurent. He's watching us from Uruguay. Hi, Philip. You're watching from Uruguay. And we have other people watching us from different cities in Morocco. Rabi' al-Khali', a very dear friend of mine. He helped us a lot when my students went to Marrakesh. He manages a train system in Morocco. He told me also will be watching on his computer at home. So thank you all for helping us, and thank you for coming to this event. And now I want to introduce the speaker, but before I do so, I want to tell you that you see a sign here that says the Tangier Forum for Global Studies, and I hope you pay attention to it. We are trying to establish a real forum in the city of Tangier to make sure to bring speakers from the United States, but also from other countries, from France and Europe, maybe even the Middle East, maybe, who knows, Asia and South Africa, to make sure that we, in Tangier, we get to listen to the best ideas and to the best thinkers about the issues that are facing humanity today. It's a real challenging task. Tangier is becoming, once again, a major international city, and we should have great ideas expressed in the English language here as well. I mean, we will provide the translation, but we need to diversify our linguistic horizons to make sure that also the Anglophone side of things, which in many parts of the world is the dominant one, is represented in the city. And so please help us spread the word about the Tangier Forum for Global Studies. We hope to make it a permanent fixture of the city, and encourage your friends to attend and participate. And as you know, people watching us online, they can ask a question online too and send an email. It is my great privilege to be presenting to you today Tony David. We just met. Our friendship is an unusual one. It's an unusual one too. We met in a very miraculous fashion. You know, through a mutual friend in Manhattan, New York. She told me, "You need to meet this guy. You need to meet this guy." So at the end, a few hours later, we were communicating on the internet, and he told me about the work he's doing. And I said, "This is a great topic for our forum in Tangier." And so, I mean, a couple of months later, I think here he is in Tangier, giving us this lecture. He will be talking about friendship in politics. Very few people pay attention to it, but it plays a central place in politics. And he will be looking specifically at the case of the friendship between Ruth Dayan, the wife of Moshe Dayan, and Raimonda Tawil, the mother-in-law of Yasser Arafat. And I just started reading the book. I mean, unfortunately, I didn't have a copy. He sent it to me on Kindle. So just today, an hour or so, I tried to read as much as I could. It sounds fascinating, and I'm sure you will get a great experience from him. David has a PhD from the University of Chicago. He worked as a teacher, scholar, translator, and biographer, mostly in Germany, Jerusalem, and the West Bank. He helped launch the Bard College program at Al-Quds University in East Jerusalem, and is currently developing educational programs for Nazareth and West Bank universities. He has published widely in academic journals and books, including his biography of the Palestinian activist Sari Nusayba, Once Upon a Country, voted as one of the best books of 2007 by Christian Science Monitor and Amazon. He's working on a variety of books, and I'm sure his story is going to be very compelling tonight. So please help me welcome Tony David to the podium.
Thank you so much. I want to thank him for making this possible. Give him a round of applause, because none of us would be here without this gentleman. So before I start this talk, I want to show a short video, and then I'll go back and tell you a little bit more about myself, so you have a better sense of the context of the story. But I want you to see the two women's faces and hear their voices, and then I'm going to introduce you to a third character who's also an important figure in this story. So,
I am Ruth Dayan from Israel, born in Israel almost 100 years ago, but it's really 1917.
My name is Raimonda Hawa, which is my family, from St. John of Acre, and Tawil, my husband's name, from Jaffa. The hospitals were full of wounded people. And suddenly, so I received a phone call after a few days. Raimonda, I need you immediately to see with groups of women who volunteer. I have a very important woman here in the hospital. So we went to the hospital, and this is Abu Dayan coming and bringing toys and bringing equipment, bringing, I don't know, medicine for the hospital, and she was there to help the people. I shouted at her. We were not kind to her. all these injured people, and all the corpses and the bodies. But she is a woman with a mission. And this is, I think, many people don't know, neither the Arabs nor the Jews. But they identified her with Diane. She has nothing to do with what Diane has done.
He turns around and says to me, I've heard something today and I'm very, very annoyed. You went to see the Fatah girls in Nablus, and I put them there, he says, and you, Mrs. Dayan, goes to visit them. I said, Moshe, and nobody believes me. Maybe you will believe me. I said, Moshe, I want a divorce. And he said, you really mean it? I said, yes, I want a divorce.
So you divorced him for political reasons, not personal ones?
Only political. Personal ones, I should have divorced him 10 years ago.
To talk to the wife of Moshe Dayan, a lot of people will consider this is to be traitor. It was, for me, a very hard job to convince people that we should talk to those people, the enemies. Because Dayan was speaking with the Arabs. He would go to the old city, he would speak with the Arabs.
They were talking.
They were talking. But Arafat always had hope in it. In 5 years, he, with Rabin, had a great hope. I don't know how. He was communicating. He was speaking.
Now nobody talks.
It must be sad.
It's very sad.
That you think
sad.
Things are getting worse.
Because I can't do anything. You see, it's sad that I feel that I can't do anything. I can only go on with my life till I die. I'm 98 and a half.
God bless you,
And I'll soon be 100. You see, even my great-grandson, 5 years old, he asked his cousin, how old is Grandma Ruth? He says to her, in 98, so he's with his little fingers, he does this, and he says, oh, that's crazy, because she'll be 102 in the next Mondial.
The next World Cup.
Isn't she beautiful? I love her.
I think that wars are the most exciting events in life. It's a matter of death and life. And yes, and you probably, I hope, get excited when you watch it in the film. Just imagine if you don't watch it, but you live it. Nothing doing. War is, I think, is the most exciting, dramatic event in life or in that. To get frightened to death, and you feel terribly relaxed when you manage to come through.
Do you prefer the company of soldiers to the company of politicians?
I want to say a couple things about being here and how amazing it is to be in Tangier. Yesterday I arrived after a long flight, and a friend of mine who's in the audience and his uncle took me to Fez. And for me, it was like a pilgrimage to go to Fez and to see where Maimonides and Ibn Rushd lived, and at the same time, in the same period, which has gone down in history as an example of the golden ages of dialogue of civilizations. One should remember, however, that they were in Fez because they were in exile from Spain. Before going to Baltimore, Ruth showed me her defiant side, where at the time she was still driving, so she invited me to jump in her car, and she was a very bad driver. And so she would race through Tel Aviv, and I asked her, well, where are we going, Ruth? She said, it's a surprise, another surprise. So after maybe, I don't know if anyone's been to Israel, the West Bank, but as you know from Tel Aviv, it takes about 30 minutes before you get to the separation wall between Israel, the old pre-Six-Day War border. So we got to this wall that was incidentally built by her nephew, or Moshe's nephew, someone very close to her. And Israelis aren't supposed to go on the other side. Ruth figured out a way of doing it, and she went from one village to the next until we were on the other side of the wall, and we visited a Palestinian village of women who run a cooperative selling their products around the world, and they raised money for their village. So after breaking laws with Ruth, we headed off to Baltimore. And what my main thing I wanted to figure out in Baltimore in order to write the book was, well, what is the source of their friendship? Why is it so special? So we got to Baltimore and took a cab from the train station. We flew into New York, and the minute we got to where Ramona was staying, Ramona raced out of the house, and she grabbed Ruth, and the two fell into one another's arms, embracing, kissing, crying. We went inside, and for 3 days they talked about friends. They talked about what was happening currently in Israel and Palestine. And all the while, I was watching them, trying to figure out again, so what about this friendship? After a couple days of becoming very comfortable with them, I turned to Ramonda and I said, well, Ramonda, what is it about Ruth that you love so much? What is your friendship all about? Well, then she told me the story that you heard a little bit here, but the story is actually a lot more interesting than the BBC report. The first time they met, Ramonda was living in Nablus, and Moshe Dayan, this is 1970, Moshe Dayan was chasing Yasser Arafat around the West Bank, and he thought he had Arafat cornered in Nablus. So he sent the army into Nablus. Arafat got away, of course, but he shot the place up, and there were lots of wounded people, including children. So the next day, Ramonda was in the hospital, and Ruth showed up in the hospital with toys. And that's where they met, and that's where they had their first confrontation of Ramonda saying, what are you doing here? As this colonial madame coming and giving toys to children shot by your husband. Ruth fended off her criticisms, then went home and asked for a divorce. That's how their friendship started, and that's how Ruth's 35, 36 years of marriage with Moshe ended. Well, Ramonda told me one other story that got me thinking about their friendship. She said when she was a little girl, now Ramonda, as background, Ramonda comes from one of the most prominent Palestinian Christian families in the country. Her father was called the Syrian Prince because he owned vast lands in northern Galilee. And he even owned a Crusader castle in which Ramonda was born. She was born in a castle with servants, and her mother was an American-born Palestinian feminist. Her father was this dandy who owned half of the Galilee. And in 1948, she lost it all. So she explained how that happened, how the shells from the Israeli army came in and forced all the people in Haifa, where she was with her parents, to flee. She ended up in a convent in Nazareth and stayed there during the war, thinking that her parents were dead. Well, they survived, but all of the properties, all of the villas, all of the villages they owned, like feudal princes, they were gone. And Ramonda, in the convent, this was 1948, she developed very close friendships with a number of Israeli Jewish girls who also were sent to the convent, because after the Holocaust, many French Jews moved to Israel and they sent their daughters to convent schools because they wanted their daughters to speak French and to have a French education. So Ramonda's friends were French Jewish girls, survivors of the Holocaust. One day, her best friend named Devorah invited her home to visit her mother. Ramonda, of course, accepted, and she got the address. All the street names had changed because Israel controlled Haifa. So she asked directions, she spoke a little bit Hebrew. Eventually she got to this home where Devorah lived, only to discover the home belonged to Ramonda's family. And she got to the front door shaking. She knocked on the front door, and Devorah's mother opened the door. And Ramonda saw through the door that the piano, the paintings, the rugs, the chandelier, all belonged to her family, and yet Devorah's family was living there. Shocked, she screamed at the mother, "You're a thief." Well, at the same time, she noticed a tattoo on Devorah's mother's forearm. And Devorah's mother said, "Ramonda, we're not thieves. You don't understand what happened to us. We were put here in this home, and the minute there's peace between Arabs and Jews, we want you to come home to your house." Well, in Baltimore, Ramonda told me this story, and Ruth was crying, and Ramonda was crying. Ruth had never heard that story. And for me, it started a process of understanding their friendship, but I didn't understand it very well. I had enough information to start writing chapters on the book, though. So I went off and I began doing what I do. I started writing chapter after chapter on this story, beginning at the beginning. I decided not to be the ghostwriter. I decided to write it as the author. So women being third person. After I finished the first chapter, I gave it to Ruth, and I waited a day, and she called me up. She said, "Come, I want to talk to you about this." So I was very proud of myself. I thought I'd done a good job, and I'd captured the essence of this period of time. Ruth turned to me and she said, "This isn't our story. You got it wrong." And I said, "What do you mean, Ruth? I got all the facts right." As you know, I don't know if there are any historians in the room, but historians deal with documents and letters and secondary literature and books and things. And so I thought a good job of building the background of the conflict, the sources of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, why it exploded when it did. And Ruth turned to me and she said, "Well, that's not what our story's about. And that's not why we thought you could do it." So I went home and I thought, well, I'll try again. Failed once, I tried again. So I wrote a different chapter later in time, chronologically. But the same thing happened. Ruth looked at me and she said, "Look, maybe we made the wrong decision. We tried a couple other people, and maybe you're not the right guy either, because this is not our story. Our story's not about Moshe Dayan and Yasser Arafat." I said, "Ruth, I know that. I'm not writing about them." She said, "Yeah, but they're everywhere. You're really writing about the political conflict. You're not writing about our friendship." And then again, I thought, well, but that's the only reason your friendship is important. I didn't tell her that, but I was thinking, the only reason anyone's interested in your friendship is because you were married to Moshe Dayan, and Ramonda was the mother-in-law of Yasser Arafat. I mean, that's the story. Well, I gave it another shot. Once again, Ruth shot that down. And I tried to start up with Ramonda. I thought, well, maybe if I write a chapter about Ramonda's life and I'll give it to her, maybe I'll have some better luck. And I tried that. And once again, the same thing happened. And I just felt like a total failure. Like, I can't write this story. What is wrong with me or with them? Then some of the members of the family got a hold of the chapters, and then the whole thing started, because the daughter didn't like the way I presented Moshe, and the son didn't like the way I presented him. So things became very complex, and I was at the point of complete despair, about ready to give up, because I thought I put enough time in this story, it's not going anywhere. Well, the funny thing is what really created the breakthrough in telling the story was a fight between Ruth and Ramonda. Now, they fight a lot. They fought shortly after I met them. They rang me up in the middle of the night and on Skype, and I had to adjudicate between their quarrel. Well, this was a major fight where they were at each other's throats, as it were, and they were fighting about something I wrote about Moshe. But in the middle, as it happens so often, in the middle of this fight, I listened to them and I reminded them, "Ruth, Ramonda, you guys really love each other, right?" And they said yes. And I felt like I was their psychologist. Well, isn't that more important than what Ruth feels about Moshe? Because Ruth still loves him, despite the fact he was a terrible husband. He was a philanderer, he was abusive. And they agreed, and then it kind of struck me that maybe that's where I've gone wrong all along. And that's why I was unable to write the story, because I was starting at the wrong place. So, in other words, maybe I should start at their shared trauma and the kind of empathy that flows out of their shared trauma, rather than start from a political position of trying to build the background of the conflict and shoehorn these women into the conflict. So I tried that. I tried another chapter, and this time Ruth was really happy with it, and I felt like I was onto something. And I wasn't only onto something in terms of the book, because for me, it was torturous to write the book. It was painfully long. It was immensely rewarding because I got to know these women. Ruth is now 99, and I'm still in very close contact with both women. But it was transformative because it really taught me something. And it taught me something that I want to go into now, and then hopefully we can discuss after this. It taught me that when you start trying to understand a conflict, it could be Burundi, it could be Rwanda, it could be the Ukraine, it could be Israel-Palestine. When you start with concepts that people consider sacred, and they could be religious concepts, they could be nationalist concepts. Very often they're both. There's no way to get anywhere. I mean, you can't resolve those sorts of conflicts because people hold these sacred views that they're not going to move from. And in terms of Ruth and Ramonda, the only way, I think, and they were able to get over this enormous weight of ideology, sentiment, memory, because both women had buried dozens, hundreds of friends, family, because of this conflict. The closest friends on both sides had been killed because of it. But the only way they could get over that was they shared, first of all, trauma, the trauma of loss. And on Ruth's side, she was traumatized by Moshe, and Ramonda was traumatized by having lost a country and being a part of a nation in exile. So they shared that, but the friendship that grew out of that, in a sense, went beneath and beyond ideology, where the two women really see each other primarily as human beings, as friends, of course, but not as a Jew or a Christian, not as an Israeli or a Palestinian. And once I started thinking that way, I began reading newspapers differently, and I was still living in Israel at the time, and I realized that so much of the conflict is fed because the journalists or the politicians really only see things through ideas. And they really are not trained, they're not used to cutting through these ideas and seeing the basic fundamental human reality that they all live in. Now, maybe in Tangier you're used to that, people living together, but in Israel and Palestine you're not. There are walls between people. They can't meet. They can't sit down and have a coffee. They can't talk about their favorite movie. It's illegal to move between the West Bank and Israel. So I began at that point to spend more time in the Galilee in the north, where half the population is Jewish, half the population is Palestinian. And the funny thing about the Galilee is it seems really normal, actually, that the conflict disappears. There's a lot more empathy there than I expected once I was looking for it. I mean, that's the sort of the cognitive breakthrough I had. I started looking for something that previously I'd assumed but I never seen. But suddenly I was seeing that people are living together, collaborating together. They're not really discussing what separates them. They're unified by their jobs, their families, their friends. And the question then for me is how to use that basic fundamental reality and recast politics somehow. Is there a way in a conflict zone for the normal human interactions to triumph over ideology? Now Ruth and Ramona right now, they shift and vacillate between despair, thinking that nothing's going to change, and a vision they both share actually of a single state in Palestine, in Israel, where the walls will disappear, the barbed wire will go away, and the peoples in the region will figure out some kind of a federation, some kind of a political forum for them to live together. But the nationalism, and especially the religious ideology, will be suppressed enough that people will be able to live together without, the specter of terrorism on the one side or occupation on the other. So that's the message that they, in a sense, they look at me as their emissary. I'm talking about the book, but I feel like I'm on a mission as well to deliver for Ruth her last message to the world and her last message to Israel. The book is being translated into Hebrew now. So her hope that empathy will win out over the kind of power and idea-driven warmongering that her husband represented will win. So that's the story of Ruth and Ramona. That's the story of my last several years. And what I would really like now is for some questions from you, and a kind of a dialogue. This is supposed to be dialogue of civilizations, but kind of dialogue of how, especially in the Middle East, how places where tribal loyalties, religious loyalties can be surmounted, and a new kind of humanism can be rediscovered. Thank you.